If you've ever seen sheep eating leaves out of a tree, then you've seen tree fodder in action. Today I'm going to share with you why tree fodder or tree hay is so beneficial and why you should consider it. I'm Natalie Lucier from Waykeeper Farm and Nerdery, and today we're going to be talking about tree hay for sheep, but it provides a lot of nutrition for all kinds of animals from ruminants like cows, goats, horses, as well as sheep. So I'm going to be focusing on sheep, but this definitely applies if you don't have sheep. So first, let's talk about the benefits of tree fodder or tree hay. So the biggest one is that once your system is established, once your trees are planted, you basically get free food year after year, not including the cost of your labor and your time. And that's because trees live for such a long time. So this is a very long-lived system. There's also carbon sequestration benefits. So you have trees that are super established after the long term. They are storing carbon into the soil, they're holding the soil, and they're also reducing erosion. Another big benefit of having more trees around and trees planted in your pastures is that they tend to bloom earlier, which means that pollinators like bees will have food earlier on in the season when things tend to be a little bit more scarce. You also get another resource, which is wood chips. So after you cut branches and you feed the leaves to your sheep, you're going to end up with the branches that they didn't eat. And these can be chipped and used inside their sacrifice areas, for example, or they can be used to mulch a garden or pathways, and they really help improve the soil too. Plus, in a silvopasture design, which means that you are mixing trees with pasture, that can provide shade for your animals in the summer as well as windbreaks in the winter. So now let's talk about how this works. So the first thing first is that you'll want to start planting these trees early because you do want them to be pretty established before you start harvesting from your trees. Now you might be thinking, okay, I'm gonna plant some trees, but then once I harvest all the branches, the trees will die. And yes, you would be correct in that assumption. But what we're going to do is we're going to plant enough trees that we can rotate so that we only harvest from each tree every 3 years. So what we end up doing is coppicing the trees. So we cut down some of the branches, and depending on what kind of tree it is, you might keep most of the branches and just select a few so that you don't overwhelm the tree when they're young. And for other types of trees, you can actually cut pretty heavily, and that will send up new shoots. And then you can let those shoots grow, or you can even cut them back each year depending on what type of tree they are. So you want to do a little bit more research before you start to cut and prune your trees to give as your animal fodder. And believe it or not, doing this type of coppicing every 3 years can actually extend the life of the tree because you're constantly giving it that vigorous new growth, and that can even make it stronger over time. Now, after you've cut these branches, you can either feed them right away when they're fresh and green, or you can store them for the winter, which is what I think is the most useful application for tree hay, because a lot of times we're buying in hay or trying to grow and store our own hay for the winter months. So what you want to do is you want to bundle up your branches and try to protect the inner branches and the inner leaves so that they dry and they also stay as fresh as possible. So this is a technique that will take a little bit of trial and error if it's your first time doing it. There are great examples of how people tie these up in other videos as well. Once we have our whole system established, I'll be happy to record an update on how all of that is going. And if you want to dive deeper into the very specifics of how this works, choosing the best trees for the nutrition and absorption of your animals, then you'll definitely want to check out Gaia Formation. So this is not sponsored in any way, but I took the Gaia Formation course all about tree hay and tree fodder, and I found it to be extremely useful. It goes into a lot of the scientific as well as the traditional aspects of tree hay, because this is a system that humans have been using for a very, very long time, and this is a very effective way of feeding your animals, and it doesn't use any machinery, right? Which is so cool. But there is a lot of science to it as well, because not all trees were created equal for feeding animals like sheep, cows, goats, and horses. So I highly recommend Gaia Formation. I'll put a link below if you're curious to check it out. And also, I did hear that they're working on translations, so currently the course is in French, but I know that they're working on an English translation as well. So which trees should you start with if you're planting your own tree hay system? Well, there's definitely trees that stand out and that go to the top of the list when it comes to protein amounts, digestibility, as well as just better nutrition. And that top of the line one is white mulberry. So mulberry trees are amazing. They have so much protein for animals, and they also tend to be very digestible, which is not the case for all types of trees. Plus, sheep love it. So it's true, just like with humans, sheep have certain preferences when it comes to different types of tree leaves to choose from. So they have their favorites. Mulberries are definitely up there. And they have trees that, maybe they'll eat the leaves, or the pines if that's all they have or if they're being offered them. So for example, pine trees are kind of at the bottom of the list. So here's a good list of trees to consider depending on your context. And your context will vary based on where you're located, what grows well in your area, as well as what you have access to. So the first one is mulberry, then we have ash tree and willow, then chestnut, alder, and locust. Now, locust does tend to be harder to digest, so they might not eat as much of it. Now, if you're not sure if you want to dive into planting a bunch of trees for tree hay and tree fodder yet, then there's an easy way to get started, and that is to cut down any volunteer trees that are growing too close to your house or to your barns, for example, and kind of just those sneaky trees that you don't think are in the right spot, and then just feed them to your sheep and see what happens. You might be surprised by how much they like these leaves. Now, you do want to be careful because not all trees are good for sheep, and you'll definitely want to watch out for oak trees, which can be toxic to sheep and other ruminants. So just make sure to identify what tree it is before you feed it to them. There are tons of great websites and databases for identifying trees based on the leaf patterns or the way that they grow. So if you have already established a tree hay system on your property, I would love for you to share any tips you have with those who might just be getting started below. So go ahead and leave a comment. And if you're curious and you have questions about tree hay or tree fodder, leave those questions below too. To find out how we rotationally graze our sheep during the spring and summer, go ahead and watch this video now.